The shy waitress helped the bodyguard's deaf mom, but no one expected his reaction. What he did next left the entire restaurant frozen in silence. If this story already feels like something worth hearing, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Rain pressed against the tall windows of the Crownstone Grill, drumming a restless rhythm that melted into the low hum of jazz. Outside, Manhattan blurred into streaks of silver and gold. Inside, chandeliers shimmered like trapped stars, scattering light across marble floors polished enough to reflect the city's secrets. It was the kind of place where powerful people whispered over champagne, and where waitresses like Alia Croft learned to disappear. She moved between tables with quiet grace, her tray steady, her smile practiced. The others teased that she was a ghost with good posture, always polite, never personal. They weren't wrong. At 25, Alia had perfected the art of invisibility. It was safer that way. You couldn't be judged, mocked, or broken if no one ever really saw you. Sometimes, when the dining room fell silent between courses, she swore she could still hear her mother's voice spelling words into her palm. Soft, patient, half laughter, half love. The memory carried its own kind of warmth, the sort that hurt if you held it too long. Table 6 wants another round, called Mara, the head waitress, her voice slicing through the music. And please don't spill on the suits tonight. One of them looks like he could break bones for a living. Alia almost smiled. She'd already noticed him. The man near the window, broad-shouldered beneath a tailor black suit, the sort of posture that said trained to react before thinking. His eyes, a cool gray, never rested. They scanned every exit, every mirror. Harry Cravens. Even the name sounded solid, unbending. He wasn't a banker or a politician. He moved like someone used the shadows, someone who measured people by the weight of their silence. Rain tapped harder against the glass, and for a fleeting second Alia caught his reflection in the window, his profile rigid, the city's lightning glinting off the faint scar at his temple. She looked away quickly, refocusing on her tray. But movement at his table drew her attention again. The older woman across from him was waving her hand, her lips shaping words no one seemed to catch. The servers passed by, oblivious. The guests around them kept talking, their laughter too loud for the small figure with silver hair and kind, expressive eyes. Alia hesitated only a moment before setting her tray aside. She approached quietly, the soft soles of her shoes making no sound on marble. Her hands moved before she could think, fluid, instinctive. Signing. Can I help you? The woman's eyes widened, then softened into relief. Her whole face seemed to brighten. She replied with careful, elegant gestures. Oh, how lovely. I was only trying to ask for tea. 2 sugars, please. My son pretends he doesn't like it that way, but I know better. Alia smiled, warmth rising through the professional calm she wore like armor. I'll make sure it's just right, she signed back. A few nearby diners slowed their conversations, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The chandelier light caught the silver in the woman's hair as she laughed soundlessly, a sound you could almost feel. Behind her, the man by the window stirred. His voice was low, even the kind that could quiet a room. You know sign language? Alia turned. The question wasn't casual. His eyes weren't simply observing. They were searching, as though she'd spoken a language no one had used on him in years. My mother was hard of hearing, she said softly. It's been years since I used it, but some things stay. Something flickered in his face, surprise first, then something she couldn't name. Guilt? Recognition? It vanished before she could be sure. You signed beautifully, said the older woman. Mrs. Cravens, Alia realized, as her fingers danced with grace. It's rare anyone takes the time. I wish more people did, Alia replied, still smiling. Her voice felt steadier than her heartbeat. Across the restaurant, a hush spread, the kind that falls when people sense they're witnessing something fragile and real. Even the rain outside seemed to pause, hanging against the glass in long silver lines. Mrs. Cravens continued chatting in quick, delighted signs about the tea, the weather, her dislike of the city's noise. Alia kept up easily, translating gestures into warmth. For the first time all evening, she forgot the ache in her feet and the weight of invisibility. When Alia returned with the tea, Mrs. Cravens thanked her again, fingers fluttering in elegant rhythm. Harry watched the exchange, unmoving, unreadable. He looked like a man who'd seen 1,000 dangerous things. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, this quiet waitress unsettled him. Not because she threatened him, but because she saw him. Have you ever met someone who saw past your silence and made you wish they hadn't because it suddenly made you visible? If you've ever felt that kind of quiet shift, follow me in this story. It's only just beginning. Enjoy your evening, Alia said softly, collecting her tray. Mrs. Craven smiled. Harry only nodded, eyes still fixed on her. As she turned toward the kitchen, she felt that stare following her, steady, uncertain, until the swinging door closed behind her and the hum of conversation returned. She didn't look back. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, somewhere between the hush and the rain, the first crack appeared in a man made entirely of armor. Alia didn't know it yet, but that small moment, the shared language, the unguarded smile, was about to unravel every wall she'd spent her life building. It would draw her into a world of secrets, guilt, and redemption, starting with a man whose silence spoke louder than any scream. Rain had washed the city clean by morning, leaving the sky a pale watercolor gray. The Crownstone Grill opened for its midday service, the air thick with the smell of roasted garlic and citrus polish. Alia Croft adjusted her apron, half expecting yesterday's moment with the deaf woman to dissolve like a dream. If this story already has you leaning closer, hit like and subscribe. Some silences are worth hearing to the end. But when the lunch crowd began to fill the room, she saw Mrs. Cravens again, sitting at the same table by the window, sunlight catching her silver hair. The older woman smiled the instant she noticed Alia and began to sign with quiet enthusiasm. I was hoping you'd be here. Alia's heart lifted as she returned the gesture. I work most days. It's good to see you again. Mrs. Cravens motioned for her to sit, the kind insistence of someone who hadn't shared a proper conversation in far too long. The restaurant buzzed softly around them, cutlery clinking, rainwater dripping from umbrellas. But in that small corner, there was peace. Alia hesitated, glancing toward the counter where Mara was barking orders. Then she lowered herself into the empty chair. Just for a minute, she signed with a grin. Mrs. Cravens laughed, her hands trembling slightly as she formed her reply. Minutes are all I ever get with my son these days. Alia's smile faltered. He's very protective, she replied, choosing her words carefully. He seems to care about you a great deal. The older woman's eyes softened, but her expression carried an ache that words, spoken or signed, couldn't hide. He protects the whole world, she signed slowly, but not himself. He forgets that listening is another kind of strength. That line lodged in Alia's chest. She thought of the way Harry had scanned the room the night before, every muscle wound tight, eyes always calculating escape routes. A man who could fight for anyone but talk to no one. Mrs. Cravens continued, hands moving delicately. He was always brave. Even as a boy, he'd stand between me and anything that frightened me. But after the army, after the work he does now, it's as though he shut the door and threw away the key. What kind of work? Alia asked aloud, voice soft, not wanting to pry but unable to resist. Mrs. Cravens looked toward the window where a black car idled across the street. He never says, but I see it in his eyes. He's seen too much. Violence leaves its shadow. Alia followed her gaze. The sleek sedan gleamed like a mirror under the muted daylight. Even from this distance, she could imagine him inside. Phone pressed to his ear, face unreadable, ready to step into danger without flinching. When she turned back, Mrs. Cravens was watching her carefully. You make him nervous, she signed. Alia blinked. Me? You looked at him like a person, not a weapon, the older woman replied. He doesn't know what to do with that. Heat crept into Alia's cheeks. She stood quickly, reaching for her notepad to hide the flush. Can I get you something to eat, Mrs. Cravens? The woman chuckled, a silent laugh that sparkled brighter than sound. Tea again, dear. 2 sugars. He'll say it's too sweet, but he'll drink half of it anyway. Alia nodded and walked toward the counter, her mind spinning. She had served hundreds of customers, wealthy lawyers, bored couples, corporate ghosts, but none of them had ever felt like this. A story unfolding in slow motion, a connection waiting to bloom. When she returned with the tea, Mrs. Cravens was gazing at the door, her face lighting up in that unmistakable maternal way. Harry Cravens stood there, rein still clinging to his shoulders. He looked sharper than yesterday, dressed in charcoal gray instead of black, but the same watchful energy surrounded him. He scanned the room until his eyes found Alia, then his mother. The slightest exhale left his lips. He crossed the floor in long, silent strides. Several heads turned. He carried presents the way others carried perfume. "Mum," he said quietly, leaning down to kiss Mrs. Cravens's forehead. "You shouldn't have come out alone." She rolled her eyes and began to sign quickly, her gestures teasing, affectionate. Alia bit back a smile as she translated aloud. "She says she's not made of glass." Harry shot her a sideways glance. "You sign and translate?" Alia shrugged lightly. "Old habit. Helps people understand." "She's not your responsibility," he murmured. "I don't think she wants to be anyone's responsibility," Alia replied before she could stop herself. For the briefest second, the corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of amusement or disbelief, she couldn't tell. Mrs. Cravens, clearly delighted, took Alia's hand and patted it. "See," she signed, "she listens." Harry sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if conceding defeat. "She always gets her way," he said quietly. Alia smiled. "It's a gift." He looked at her then, not as a waitress, not as an intrusion, but as if trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. "Thank you," he said finally, the words clipped but sincere. "For yesterday. For today. You don't have to thank me," she said. "Your mother's lovely. She deserves to be heard." Something flickered behind his eyes again. Something raw, a quick shadow of emotion before the wall slammed back into place. Mrs. Cravens caught the exchange and signed with mock sternness. "Stop being so serious, both of you." That made him laugh, a sound so low and unexpected it startled even him. For a heartbeat, Alia saw what his mother meant. The boy who once laughed easily, now buried beneath duty and silence. A few tables over, Mara gestured impatiently for Alia's help. The moment broke. "I should get back to work," Alia said, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Enjoy your tea." Harry nodded, still watching her. Mrs. Cravens signed something mischievous. Alia caught enough to blush, but pretended not to. When Alia disappeared toward the kitchen, Harry turned to his mother. "What did you tell her?" Mrs. Cravens smiled innocently, her fingers moving too quickly for him to catch. He frowned, shaking his head. "I'll have to learn one day, won't I?" She touched his arm gently, her expression softening. "It's never too late to listen." That evening, after closing, rain began again, soft and steady, pooling on the sidewalk like spilled mercury. Alia stepped outside, umbrella in hand, and froze when she saw the black sedan parked under the streetlight. Inside, through the misted glass, Harry sat behind the wheel. Mrs. Cravens rested against the seat beside him, fast asleep, her head tilted toward the window, peaceful. Harry's gaze was distant, fixed on a restaurant entrance. For once, his face wasn't carved from stone. There was something almost tender in it, an ache too fragile for words. The car's headlights glowed against the wet pavement, painting the street gold. Alia watched as he reached across to adjust a blanket over his mother's shoulders, his movements careful, reverent. Then he looked up, meeting Alia's eyes through the rain-streaked glass. Neither of them moved for a long moment, two people caught between silence and something dangerously close to understanding. He gave the smallest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, gratitude, or maybe something he hadn't figured out himself. Then the car eased away into the night, its taillights vanishing down the slick avenue. Alia stood under her umbrella until the red glow disappeared. For the first time in years, she felt less like a ghost and more like someone being seen. Have you ever met someone whose quiet presence echoed long after they were gone? Let us know in the comments below. And somewhere in the city beyond the rain, A man who had spent a lifetime protecting others drove through the quiet streets, wondering why the memory of a shy waitress refused to leave his mind. 2 days later, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp and bright over Manhattan. The Crownstone Grill was unusually calm. No rush of suits, no impatient phone calls, just the low hum of jazz and the occasional clink of silverware. Alia Croft wiped down the counter for the third time, not because it needed it, but because idle hands made her restless. The stillness of the restaurant left too much room for thought. Mara leaned against the espresso machine, sipping coffee and eyeing her with a grin. "You've been in a daze all morning," she teased. "Don't tell me the scary guy with the jawline has you spooked." Alia blinked. "What guy?" Mara raised an eyebrow. "Please. The one who sits by the window and looks like he could break a man's spine with his pinky finger. The one whose mother adores you." Heat crept into Alia's cheeks. "He's just a customer." "Right," Mara said, dragging the word out. "And I'm just an actress waiting to be discovered." Alia laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." Mara smirked, clearly pleased to have drawn a reaction. "He's been in twice this week. Alone. I think your ghost charm might be haunting him." The bell above the door chimed as if on cue. Alia glanced up, and there he was, Harry Cravens. No mother this time. No silver-haired warmth beside him. Just the man himself, tall, steady, carrying a kind of quiet gravity that drew eyes without asking for them. He approached the counter, and even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. "Afternoon," Alia said, forcing her voice to stay level. He nodded. "Afternoon. I'm just here to pick up lunch for my mother." She smiled faintly. "Of course. The usual, tea, 2 sugars?" His lips curved, almost a smile. "You remember." "I remember most things," she said, then regretted it immediately when his gaze held hers for a fraction too long. Mara, hovering nearby, cleared her throat and fled to the back, muttering something about invoices. Alia busied herself with the order, grateful for the distraction. The kettle hissed, and steam curled between them. She could feel his presence, still composed, the kind of stillness that carried stories. When she handed him the tea, their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but enough to send a jolt through her chest. "Your mother's lovely," she said softly. "She told me you're protective." A shadow crossed his expression. "That's one way to put it. You work in security, right?" He hesitated before answering. "Something like that." There was a weight to the words, something unsaid lingering in the air. Alia wanted to ask more, but instinct told her he wasn't ready. Instead, she said, "She worries about you." His gaze sharpened, not in anger, but surprise. "She said that." "She didn't have to," Alia replied. For a moment, he looked as though he might respond, but the wall in his eyes returned, brick by brick. He took the cup and nodded. "Thank you." When he turned to leave, she watched him pause at the door, his reflection caught in the glass, the city stretching beyond him. Then he was gone. That evening, Mrs. Cravens returned alone, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a hat. She looked more fragile in the bright light, her hands trembling slightly as she signed a greeting. "You've seen my son again," she signed, smiling knowingly. Alia nodded, cheeks warming. "You picked up your lunch." Mrs. Cravens laughed silently. "He pretends he runs errands for me, but he only wants excuses to come here." Alia blushed deeper. "He seems different when you talk about him." The older woman's hand slowed. "He wasn't always this way." Alia tilted her head, curious. Mrs. Cravens's eyes softened as she signed. "He used to play guitar?" "Every night, until his fingers blistered. Music was how he spoke when words failed him." "What happened?" Alia asked, her voice hushed. The reply came slower this time. "He went overseas. Bodyguard work. Something went wrong. Something he never speaks of. When he came back, he stopped playing. Stopped talking about anything that mattered." The image struck Alia deeply. A young man trading music for silence, melody for duty. She recognized that kind of quiet, the kind that wasn't peace, but survival. She poured more tea and said gently, "Sometimes silence is safer than saying what hurts." Mrs. Cravens looked up at her, tears bright in her eyes. "That's exactly what I fear." They sat together for a long while, the world shrinking to the soft clatter of dishes and the steady rain that had begun again outside. When Mrs. Cravens finally left, she squeezed Alia's hand in thanks. "You listen," she signed. "That's rare." The next afternoon, the restaurant buzzed with a different energy. A birthday group laughing too loud, a businessman complaining about his steak, a woman in pearls snapping her fingers at staff. Alia kept her head down, moving table to table with quiet precision. She was refilling a glass of wine when the woman in pearls waved her off. "Excuse me," the woman said sharply. "You've been ignoring us for 10 minutes." Alia blinked, startled. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I thought." "Don't think," the woman interrupted. "Just do your job." Before Alia could respond, a voice cut through the tension. Low, firm, impossible to ignore. "Is there a problem here?" She turned. Harry stood a few feet away, expression calm, but eyes cold enough to freeze the air. He must have come in while she was serving. The woman faltered. "I know. No problem." She picked up her glass and muttered something about poor service before retreating to her seat. Alia's heart hammered. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. Looked like she needed reminding that people deserve respect. "I'm used to it," Alia said quietly. "Maybe you shouldn't be," he replied. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. "Thank you," she said finally. He gave a slight nod, his voice gentler now. "You shouldn't have to thank someone for doing the right thing." As he turned to go, she reached for the table to steady herself, and their hands brushed again, just for a second. It wasn't a spark this time. It was a pulse, steady, human, undeniable. She looked up. He was already walking away, his shoulders tense, as if he didn't trust what he'd just felt. Through the window, she watched him disappear into the rain, every step measured, controlled. But for the first time, Alia sensed something new beneath his silence. An echo of the boy who once played guitar in the dark, fingers chasing a song that had never quite left him. And without meaning to, she found herself listening for it. The air's shifting. Can you feel it? Stay close. Subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Crownstone grill shimmered under the soft glow of its evening lights. Outside, thunder rolled over the Hudson, promising another storm. Inside, the tables were half full, enough noise to sound normal, enough space for unease to linger unnoticed. Alia moved through the restaurant with her usual quiet rhythm, taking comfort in the routine. But something in the air felt different, charged like the pause before lightning. It happened just after 7. The door opened, and 2 men stepped in, their presence slicing through the chatter. They didn't belong here. Expensive suits, yes, but too stiff, too sharp. Their eyes swept the room like searchlights. One was tall and lean, his jaw marked by a faint scar, the other broader, with the kind of cold stillness that spoke of violence rather than wealth. Mara greeted them with a nervous smile, but they brushed past her, heading toward the back corner. Alia's pulse quickened. She'd worked long enough to recognize the difference between power and danger. These men carried both. She tried to steady her breathing as she poured wine for another table, but her gaze kept drifting back to the newcomers. When one of them adjusted his jacket, the fabric shifted just enough for her to glimpse the dark glint of metal. A gun. Her hand froze mid-pour, crimson liquid trembling at the rim of the glass. "Alia," Mara whispered behind her. "You okay?" "Yeah," Alia murmured, setting the bottle down. "Fine." But she wasn't fine. The men ordered whiskey, neat, no small talk, and spoke in low voices. Their words didn't carry, but their tension did. Every few seconds, one checked his watch, eyes darting toward the door. At precisely 7:30, that door opened again. Harry Craven stepped inside. He looked different tonight. No suit, just a dark jacket and gloves, the posture of someone walking in a battle. His eyes flicked toward the men in the corner, then to Alia, then away again. She saw it. The smallest hesitation, gone in a breath, but enough to confirm what she feared. He knew them. Without a word, he crossed the room and sat with them. His tone was curt, clipped, professional. To everyone else, it looked like business. But Alia could see the muscle in his jaw tightening, the way his hand never strayed far from his coat. A quiet dread settled over her. A moment later, the door opened once more. This time, it was Mrs. Cravens, smiling faintly, clutching her cane, her eyes lighting up when she spotted her son. Alia hurried over. "Mrs. Cravens, you're here late tonight." "I was nearby." The woman signed, her expression soft. "Thought I'd surprise him." Alia hesitated. "Maybe wait a moment. He's busy." But the older woman had already spotted the table. Her smile faltered. "Those men," she signed, her movements small and tense. "I've seen them before." Before Alia could respond, Mrs. Craven started toward her son. Harry rose halfway, startled. "Mum, what are you?" She began signing quickly, her hands sharp with urgency. Alia recognized fragments. Danger, leave, not safe. But Harry's expression was blank. He didn't understand. He reached out, touching her arm, murmuring something she couldn't hear over the silence that had spread through the restaurant. The two men watched with cool detachment, one smirking faintly, the other checking his watch again. Alia stood frozen, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed that she should turn away, that whatever this was, it was bigger than her, but she couldn't. Harry finally managed to guide his mother back to her seat, his voice low but strained. "Please just sit. I'll handle it." Mrs. Cravens's eyes glistened. She signed one last word, her hand trembling. "Listen, he didn't." Moments later, the men stood, leaving their untouched drinks behind. One murmured something to Harry in passing, a few short words that made his shoulders tense. Then they were gone. The heavy doors swung shut, and the sound of rain swallowed their departure. The restaurant seemed to exhale all at once. Conversations resumed, soft and cautious, as if no one quite believed what they'd seen. Alia found Mrs. Cravens still sitting at the table, staring at the door. Her hands rested motionless on the linen, her expression hollow. Alia knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" Tears filled the woman's eyes. Her fingers began to move, slow and trembling. "He protects everyone," she signed, "but never learned to listen to me." The words pierced deeper than Alia expected. She reached for the woman's hand and squeezed gently. "Maybe he will," she said. "Maybe it's just hard for him to hear." Mrs. Cravens gave a small, sad smile. "Then someone needs to teach him." It was nearly closing time when Alia stepped outside to take out the trash. The rain had returned, cold and insistent, streaking the alley with silver lines. She didn't see him at first, not until a voice came from the shadows. "You shouldn't have done that." Harry stepped forward, his jacket damp, his expression unreadable. "Done what?" she asked. "Interfered," he said, his tone flat. "My mother doesn't need you getting in the middle of things you don't understand." Anger flickered in her chest. She was scared. "I saw it. She's always scared," he snapped. "It's why I do what I do." "Then why didn't you listen?" His jaw tightened. "Because sometimes listening gets people killed." The words hit like a blow. Rain dripped from his hair, his shoulders rigid beneath the streetlight. Alia took a step closer. "You think silence keeps people safe. But all it does is build walls so high no one can reach you. Not even her." He said nothing, staring past her, fists clenched. "She doesn't need a bodyguard." Alia continued softly. "She needs her son." That broke through. His eyes snapped to hers, raw and furious, but beneath it, fear. "You don't know what my job costs," he said, voice low. "Maybe I don't," Alia said, meeting his gaze. "But I know what silence costs a mother." The rain filled the pause between them, relentless, merciless. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might say something real. Then he turned away. "Stay out of it, Alia." His voice was rough now, strained. "For your own good." He walked off into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by the rain. Alia stood there, shivering, watching until he vanished. Inside, the lights of the Crownstone grill glowed faintly through the glass. Through the window, she saw Mrs. Cravens sitting alone, hands folded, eyes distant. The older woman looked toward the rain-blurred street and began to sign softly to herself, fingers trembling. "He's afraid." And for the first time, Alia understood just how right she was. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet worry. The Crownstone Grill carried on as usual. Customers came and went. Laughter echoed against the glass, and rain painted the city in endless gray. But something in the rhythm had changed. Neither Harry Cravens nor his mother appeared. At first, Alia told herself it was coincidence. Maybe they were traveling. Maybe Mrs. Cravens was unwell. Maybe Harry's work had taken him away again. If you can feel that silence stretching thin, hold on, like and subscribe before it breaks. But each day the corner booth stayed empty, and with every untouched teapot and silent evening, unease grew inside her like a storm gathering in her chest. By the 5th day, even Mara noticed. "You've been staring at that door all week," she said, wiping down the counter. "Who are you waiting for? An angel or a ghost?" Alia forced a smile. "Neither." "Liar," Mara teased. "If it's that bodyguard again, you should just admit he got under your skin." Alia looked away. "He's complicated." Mara sighed. "So, is everyone worth thinking about?" Alia didn't answer. She was too busy listening to the rain beating against the windows, the same steady rhythm that had underscored their every meeting. By the 8th night, worry had settled into something colder. The restaurant was closing early. The storm outside had turned violent, sheets of rain pounding against the glass so hard it blurred the city lights into watercolor smears. Alia was stacking menus when the door burst open. A gust of wind swept in, scattering napkins and carrying with it the scent of rain and panic. And there, standing in the doorway, drenched to the bone, was Mrs. Cravens. Mrs. Cravens! Alia dropped everything and ran to her. The older woman looked ghostly, her silver hair plastered to her face, her coat clinging like a second skin. Her hand shook so badly she could barely sign. Alia guided her to a chair near the counter. "You're soaked. Sit, please." She grabbed a towel and pressed it into her trembling hands, then crouched beside her, searching her eyes. "What happened? Where's Harry?" Mrs. Cravens's fingers began to move, frantic, uneven. "He's gone," she signed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He hasn't come home in 3 days." Alia's breath caught. "Gone? What do you mean?" The older woman's hands flew faster, desperate to make her understand. "He was working for dangerous men. He didn't tell me, but I heard them at the door. They wanted something he wouldn't give them." There was shouting, then silence. Her movements faltered. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Alia unfolded it carefully. A smudge of rain had bled the ink, but the words were still legible. "Pier 19 Warehouse, South River District." Alia's heart pounded. "You found this." Mrs. Cravens nodded, hands trembling. "It was on the floor by the door. I think he left it for me, or maybe they dropped it. I don't know. I can't go there, Alia. I can't." The words came slower now, almost pleading. "Please, if something happens to him, I'll never forgive myself." Alia hesitated, the world narrowing to the sound of thunder and the trembling of the woman before her. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that she should call the police, tell someone, anyone. But she knew the truth before she even formed the thought. Harry wouldn't have gone to the police. Whatever he was tangled in, he'd chosen to face it alone. And Alia couldn't bear the thought of Mrs. Cravens waiting in silence for a son who might never come back. "I'll go," she said quietly. Mrs. Cravens's eyes widened in horror. "No, you can't. It's not safe. I'll just look," Alia said. "I'll see if he's there. I promise I'll come back." "You're just a girl," the older woman signed, shaking her head. "You can't fight the world he lives in." "Maybe not," Alia whispered, "but I can walk into it." She folded the note and slipped it into her apron pocket before Mrs. Cravens could protest again. The woman clutched her hand, eyes shining with fear. "Please be careful." "I will." The streets outside were nearly empty, the storm swallowing the city in sheets of rain. Umbrella handles bent under the wind, and neon lights flickered across puddles like broken stars. Alia's cab crawled through the flooded streets, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. The driver gave her a wary look when she told him the destination. "You sure about that, miss? That part of the river's bad news after dark." "I'll be fine," she lied. He dropped her off 2 blocks away. The moment she stepped out, The rain hit like a wall. She pulled her coat tighter, the note burning in her pocket. The warehouses loomed ahead, long, dark silhouettes against the flickering streetlights. Most were abandoned, windows broken, graffiti streaking their walls like old scars. But one still glowed faintly from within, Pier 19. Her shoes splashed through puddles as she made her way down the narrow path between rusted fences. The smell of oil and salt water thickened the air. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Every nerve screamed at her to turn back. She thought of her mother's hands, teaching her to sign, the calm certainty in every gesture, be brave, but never blind. Alia swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. The interior was dark, lit only by the thin glow of a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. Shadows stretched long across the concrete floor. Something metallic clinked in the distance. Footsteps, or maybe just the echo of dripping water. "Harry!" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, swallowed by the vast silence. No answer. She took another step forward, heart hammering against her ribs. The sound of her own breathing seemed too loud. A flash of lightning illuminated the space for an instant. Rows of crates, a steel table, a streak of red across the floor that might have been rust or something else. Her stomach turned. Then faintly she heard it, a muffled sound, low and sharp from deeper inside. A groan, or maybe a warning. "Harry," she whispered again, fear and hope tangled in her voice. Nothing but the steady rhythm of rain against the tin roof. She reached into her apron pocket, fingers brushing the crumpled note. It felt like the last solid thing in the world. Another flash of lightning. This time she caught movement, just a shadow slipping behind a stack of crates. Her pulse spiked. "Who's there?" No response. She took a cautious step forward, then another, until the darkness seemed to breathe around her. Her reflection flickered in a puddle on the floor, small, trembling, but standing. And then, just before the thunder rolled again, she heard it, a single, unmistakable sound. A man's voice, hoarse and pained, calling her name. "Alia!" Her breath caught. The light bulb above her flickered once, then went out. The warehouse plunged into darkness, and the waitress stepped deeper into the shadows, the rain roaring outside like the heartbeat of the city itself. Would you walk into the dark for someone who never asked to be saved? Share your thoughts in the comments. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of oil, rust, and something darker underneath. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing in irregular rhythms. Somewhere in the distance, a chain clinked, then fell silent. Alia's shoes splashed through shallow puddles as she edged forward, one hand brushing against the cold steel of a crate. The faintest light seeped through the cracks in the boarded windows, painting the concrete in slivers of gray. Her pulse pounded so hard she could hear it. "Harry," she whispered, "if your heart's racing too, don't look away. Follow this story as the light flickers and truth begins to speak." A groan answered, a low, guttural sound that came from behind a stack of boxes near the far wall. She froze, listening. "Harry, is that you?" "Alia." The voice was hoarse, rough with disbelief. She rounded the corner and stopped dead. Harry Cravens was slumped against a crate, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. His jacket was torn, and there was a smear of dirt across his face. A small flashlight lay on the floor beside him, its beam cutting a crooked path across the ground. A briefcase sat open a few feet away, papers spilling out, blueprints, photographs, signatures. God, Alia breathed. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "You're hurt." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to stop her. "You shouldn't be here." His voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. "I had to come," she said, meeting his gaze. "Your mother's terrified. You disappeared." He gritted his teeth, trying to push himself upright. "It's not safe. These men, I don't care about them." She cut in, her tone sharper than she meant. "You can't keep saving the world while you bleed alone in the dark." He turned his face away. "You don't understand what I've done." "Then help me understand." The flashlight flickered. Rain beat harder against the tin roof, thunder rolling above them like an angry drum. Alia's eyes darted to the briefcase. What's that? Proof, he said bitterly. They've been running weapons through my security routes, bribes, forged contracts, laundering money through charities. I was supposed to deliver this to them tonight, but you didn't. He laughed, a short, broken sound. No, I tried to stop them. That didn't go well. Harry, she started, but he cut her off. Why would you come here, Alia? You think this is some kind of storybook rescue? These are killers. I came because she can't, she said quietly. That made him look at her, really look at her. The defiance in her voice, the steadiness in her eyes. Your mother's waiting, she went on. She's shaking with fear because the one person she loves most keeps disappearing into silence. He flinched, his grip on her wrist loosening. Don't, he muttered. Don't talk about her. Someone has to, Alia said. You won't. He turned his face away, jaw tight, breath ragged. I've done things, he said after a long pause. Things you can't wash off. Her voice softened. Then stop running from them. He shook his head. You think it's that simple? Maybe not, she said. But hiding doesn't make it better. The flashlight guttered again, throwing his shadow high on the wall. His hands were shaking now, the blood on his fingers slick against the cold floor. Please, she said, reaching for his arm. Let me help. He looked down at her hand, small, steady, unafraid, and something inside him cracked. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You don't know why my mother can't hear. Alia froze. He swallowed hard, eyes distant. Years ago, I took a job overseas. Private security for a man who wasn't what he seemed. There was an explosion, a bombing meant to take out one of his rivals. I thought I'd clear the area. I thought I kept everyone safe. His voice broke. I was wrong. The blast hit earlier than planned. She was there visiting me. She lost her hearing because of me. The confession hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. Alia's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but there were no words for that kind of guilt. Harry kept talking, like a dam breaking. She doesn't know the full story. I told her it was an accident, that I wasn't there when it happened. But I was. I heard the blast. I saw the smoke. And I've been trying to make it right ever since. He laughed softly, hollowly, protecting everyone else, so I don't have to face the one person I failed. Alia felt tears sting her eyes. She reached for his hand. Harry. He jerked back slightly. Don't pity me. I don't. Her voice wavered but held firm. I see you. That's all. He looked up, something raw flickering behind the exhaustion. Why? Why would you still look at me like that? Because I know what it's like to carry silence, she said. My mother lost her hearing, too. Not to an explosion, but to time and illness. I watched her fade into quiet, and I couldn't stop it. So I learned to speak in her language, because love should never be silent. The rain eased for a moment, the air thick with stillness. Harry closed his eyes. You shouldn't have come. I told you, she whispered. Your mother can't reach you. So I had to. He gave a small, shaky laugh, the sound more pain than humor. You really are insane. Maybe, she said, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving. The silence between them shifted, no longer cold but fragile, waiting. He lowered his gaze to the briefcase. If they find out I didn't finish the job, they'll come for me. Maybe for anyone near me. Then we face it together, she said. His eyes met hers, dark, wounded, disbelieving. Why would you risk that? Because your mother deserves to have her son back, and you deserve to stop hating yourself. For a long moment, neither moved. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the ceiling and the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. Finally, he exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. His shoulders sagged. The weapon at his side slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Alia reached out, covering his trembling fingers with hers. Then let's start small, she said gently. One word. I can teach you. He looked down at her hand, at the warmth of it against his cold skin. What word? He asked, his voice almost breaking. Home, she whispered. For the first time, he didn't look away. The storm outside rose again, wind howling against the walls. But inside the warehouse, something quiet began to shift. A man's armor falling piece by piece, a life beginning to breathe again. Harry's hand closed over hers, trembling. Teach me, he said, and in that single, hoarse plea, Every wall he'd ever built finally came down. Sometimes the bravest words are the quietest ones. Would you have reached out your hand, too? If that moment left you holding your breath, subscribe or share, because redemption has only just begun. Weeks passed. The city thawed slowly from its rain-soaked gloom into pale spring sunlight. The rivers still carried secrets, but the darkness that had once held Harry Cravens now felt more distant, like a shadow seen from the edge of light. He was healing, though not quickly. Bandages still wrapped his ribs, and a faint bruise colored his jaw. But he was alive, and that, Alia thought, was miraculous enough. If you've ever believed that healing can sound like silence, don't drift away. Subscribe and stay close as light returns. He had moved into a quiet apartment above a bookstore, a place with creaking floors and wide windows that looked out over the street. Mrs. Cravens had insisted he rest, but she rarely stayed away for long. Most mornings, she arrived at Alia's apartment first, bearing soup, flowers, and the kind of knowing humor only a mother could deliver. "Don't let him sulk," she signed one afternoon as Alia opened the door to let her in. "He's always been stubborn. Even as a boy, he'd rather break something than ask for help fixing it." Alia smiled, guiding her inside. "I'll keep that in mind." Mrs. Cravens placed the soup down with a flourish and pointed toward the table where Harry sat, scowling at a notebook filled with messy handwriting. He looked up, catching them both watching him. "She's telling you I'm impossible, isn't she?" Alia tried not to laugh. She didn't have to. Mrs. Cravens grinned, signing quickly. "He's trying to learn but won't admit his hands are clumsy." "I saw that," Harry said, half amused, half exasperated. "Good." His mother signed back, her eyes twinkling. "Maybe your eyes finally work." Alia bit back a smile. These exchanges had become the rhythm of their afternoons. Mrs. Cravens teasing, Alia translating when needed, and Harry grumbling through his lessons with the intensity of a man preparing for battle. That day, Alia cleared the dishes from the table and brought out a new set of flashcards she'd written herself. "Okay," she said, setting them down. "Let's try again. Basic conversation. Hello. Sorry, and thank you." Harry groaned. "You make it sound easy." "It is," she said with mock sternness. "You just have to stop glaring at your own hands." Mrs. Cravens laughed soundlessly, her shoulders shaking as she signed. "He's never been good with gentle things." "Gentle things?" Harry echoed, pretending offense. "I protected billionaires and diplomats for 10 years. I can handle a few hand shapes." "Then prove it," Alia said, lifting her brows. He mimicked the motion she showed him, slowly, awkwardly, fingers fumbling. "That's better," she said. "But your wrist." She reached out to adjust his hand, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief but electric. Harry's pulse jumped. He froze, his eyes flicking to hers. For a heartbeat too long, the air between them held still. "Like this," she said quietly, guiding his wrist into place. Their eyes met again, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was something gentler, warmer, as if the world had narrowed to the space between their hands. Mrs. Cravens pretended not to notice, stirring her soup with a smile that said otherwise. The next few weeks unfolded like that, small lessons stitched between moments of laughter and unspoken emotion. Harry, once all muscle and command, now sat at Alia's kitchen table trying to shape words with his hands. Sometimes he swore under his breath. Sometimes he laughed at himself. "Your love looks like you're throwing a punch," Alia said one afternoon. "Force of habit," he muttered. "Try again." He did. Slower this time. More deliberate. "There," she said softly. "Better." He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. Outside, the rain had returned, pattering lightly against the window. The rhythm of it felt familiar now, almost comforting. They practiced until the light began to fade, and Mrs. Cravens announced she was heading home. She hugged Alia before leaving, her hands warm and soft. "He listens to you," she signed. "Don't stop teaching him." Alia nodded, her chest tight. Later that evening, Harry stayed behind to help wash dishes. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of glass and water running over porcelain. "You don't have to do that," Alia said. He shrugged. Feels normal. I like normal. She smiled. You're getting good at the signs. Good, he said. I'm barely coherent. You're improving, she insisted. You're patient now. He raised an eyebrow. That's debatable. Alia leaned against the counter. You don't give yourself enough credit. He met her gaze, eyes steady. I'm trying. I know. The words hung between them, quiet but full. Harry turned back to the sink, drying his hands on a towel. Then he hesitated, his fingers twitching like he was searching for courage. Slowly, he began to sign. The movement was halting, unsure, thumb brushing the edge of his palm, fingers curling just slightly. Thank you, he said aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Alia's breath caught. That was perfect, she said softly. Absolutely perfect. He smiled faintly. I wanted to say it right. She blinked back sudden tears. You did. His expression softened. You know, for someone who says she doesn't like attention, you cry when people appreciate you. She laughed through it. Occupational hazard. The sound made him chuckle, and for a brief moment, the kitchen felt weightless, like the whole world had exhaled. After the dishes were done, they sat by the window with coffee and the hum of the rain filling the silence. The city lights shimmered across the glass, throwing gold reflections over their faces. Your mother's proud of you, Alia said. Harry glanced down. I've given her more reasons to worry than to be proud. Maybe, she said, but you're here now. You're learning. That matters. He studied her for a long moment. You really believe that? I do. He leaned back, watching the steam rise from his mug. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, she said. It's just worth it. The way she said it, soft, certain, settled deep in him. He signed again, slower this time, his fingers steady. Thank you. This time, he didn't speak the words. Alia smiled, her throat tightening as she returned to sign. You're welcome. They sat there in silence, two people who had learned to speak without words, letting the quiet do what it always could, heal. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, the city lights gleaming like promises on the wet pavement below. And for the first time, Alia realized that silence in the right company didn't hurt at all. It felt like peace. Some silences are wounds. Others are home. Which kind do you carry? Share your thoughts. A week later, the Crownstone Grill looked nothing like the place where everything had begun. The rain was gone. Light streamed through the tall windows, catching on crystal glassware and silver cutlery. The chandeliers glowed like soft gold suns. Even the air seemed lighter, filled with laughter instead of secrets. Alia stood near the entrance, greeting customers with her usual quiet smile. But this time, her heart felt strangely full. She wasn't hiding anymore. She belonged here now, not as the invisible waitress, but as someone who had found her own way to be seen. And then she saw them, Mrs. Craven's, radiant in a sky-blue shawl, and Harry walking beside her, his hand steady on her arm. It was the first time he had returned since the night everything changed. He looked different, healthier, calmer. The haunted sharpness that once lived in his eyes had softened, replaced by something gentler, steadier. The dark suit he wore was familiar, but it no longer looked like armor. When armor turns to tenderness, stories like this begin to breathe. Stay close, subscribe, so you don't miss the language love learns next. When he caught sight of Alia, his lips curved into the smallest, most genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. Table by the window, she asked, meeting them halfway. Please, Mrs. Craven signed, beaming. Harry signed back, awkward but clear, she likes the light. Alia blinked, a smile tugging at her lips. You've been practicing. Every day, he said. My teacher's pretty strict. Mrs. Cravens laughed silently, patting his arm. He's still stubborn, she signed to Alia, but at least he listens now. They settled into their old corner booth, the one where it had all started. Outside, the city shimmered in early afternoon light, and the faint hum of traffic mixed with a low murmur of conversation. It was an ordinary lunch, yet felt sacred. Mrs. Cravens ordered her usual tea, 2 sugars, she reminded them proudly, while Alia scribbled the note with a grin. Harry watched the exchange, his eyes full of something unspoken. She's right, Alia said, placing the order slip aside. You do listen now. I had a good reason to start, he said, his voice quiet but sure. Their gazes held for a moment longer than they should have. Mrs. Cravens's hands moved quickly, drawing their attention. You know, she signed, smirking. He's handsome when he's nervous. Harry groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom! Alia burst out laughing, a warm, bright sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. She covered her mouth, but it was too late. Mrs. Cravens's eyes sparkled with delight. See? Even she agrees. Harry leaned back, trying not to smile. You two are conspiring against me. Always, Alia teased. The laughter faded into comfortable quiet, filled only by the clink of silverware and the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen. The sunlight had shifted now, spilling across the table like liquid gold. Harry signed something to his mother, slow, measured movements. How are you feeling? Mrs. Cravens responded with gentle precision. Better, now that I can talk to you without guessing. He smiled. I'm still learning. You're learning, love, she signed back, her expression tender. The words hung between them, luminous and fragile. Alia turned away, giving them a moment, her chest tightening with quiet emotion. When she returned with the tea, Mrs. Cravens reached for her hand, her touch warm and light. Thank you, she signed. Alia smiled. Always. After lunch, Mrs. Cravens excused herself to visit the restroom, leaving Alia and Harry alone at the table. The sunlight framed them in soft, forgiving hues. For a moment, neither spoke. The city outside carried on, taxis honking, children laughing, a musician playing saxophone down the block. But inside, it was quiet enough to hear a heartbeat. Harry sat back, studying her. You know, he said, I used to think silence was the safest place in the world. Alia tilted her head. And now I think it's only safe if someone else is in it with you. Her smile was small, but full. You've learned a lot for a stubborn man. He nodded slightly, eyes never leaving hers. Then, slowly he raised his hands. His movements were hesitant, but sure, fingers curling, palms shifting. I love you. The signs were imperfect, the rhythm uneven. His voice followed a second later, rough and low. I love you. Alia's breath caught. The world around them seemed to fall away. The restaurant, the light, the noise of the city, all of it faded into the space between his trembling hands and her stillness. Harry, she whispered. He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth soft. I practiced that one the longest. Her throat tightened. You just told your mother the same thing. I figured she'd forgive me for sharing it. Tears welled before she could stop them. She laughed through them instead, shaking her head. You're impossible. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. And you're the only one who ever looked at me like I wasn't. For a few long seconds, they just sat there, fingers barely touching, hearts steadying in unison. Then Alia signed back, hands trembling slightly. I love you too. Harry's expression softened completely, the guarded stillness of his face melting into something she'd never seen before. Peace. He brought her hand to his lips, just for a moment, then let it rest on the table between them. When Mrs. Cravens returned, she stopped in her tracks. Her gaze flicked from her son's glowing face to Alia's teary eyes, and understanding dawned like sunlight. About time, she signed with mock impatience. Harry laughed, shaking his head. Mom. But Mrs. Cravens only smiled, her eyes glistening. She reached across the table and took Alia's hand in hers. Thank you, she signed slowly, deliberately, each motion filled with meaning. For giving my son back to me. Alia swallowed hard. He was always yours. Mrs. Craven smiled, her hands moving once more. Now he belongs to both of us. The three of them sat there as the afternoon light deepened, laughter and silence mingling in a rhythm that needed no translation. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, time stood still, three hearts finally learning the same language. And in that perfect stillness, the word for love found its truest shape. What's your word for love? The one that speaks louder than sound. Comment below, and who knows, you may just find someone who speaks exactly your love language in the comment section. Several months later, spring had returned to Manhattan. The Crownstone Grill gleamed beneath the morning sun, its polished windows reflecting a softer skyline. The same streets that once swallowed Alia in anonymity now greeted her with warmth, the doorman nodding, the flower vendor waving, the world somehow brighter for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Life had changed, quietly but profoundly. Harry Cravens no longer guarded the powerful and corrupt. The man who once lived in the shadows now ran his own security firm, Craven's Protective Services, a small private company that specialized in protecting victims of abuse, whistleblowers, and anyone who had nowhere else to turn. "It's different," he told Alia one evening as they walked home under a sky streaked pink and gold. "Before, I protected people who paid for it. Now I protect people who need it." She'd smiled up at him, slipping her hand into his. "That sounds a lot like redemption to me." He'd squeezed her fingers gently, as if testing the word in silence before believing it. As for Alia, she still worked part-time at the Crownstone Grill. She couldn't quite leave the place that had changed everything, but most of her energy now went into teaching. 3 days a week, she stood before a small class of service workers, waiters, nurses, store clerks, teaching them how to speak with their hands. The first time a student signed, "Thank you perfectly," she cried. Mrs. Cravens had insisted on attending the first class, sitting proudly in the front row. She called it proof that kindness echoes. And she was right. By summer, their small apartment on the Upper West Side had become a home. It was modest, a few rooms, a balcony overflowing with potted herbs, and walls that carried laughter instead of silence. This morning, sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains, pooling over the kitchen table where the three of them sat for breakfast. The smell of pancakes filled the air, along with the faint sound of the city below. Cars honking, a bus braking, life unfolding in steady rhythm. Mrs. Cravens poured syrup with delicate precision while Harry flipped a final pancake onto the plate. His once broken hands moved easily now, steady and sure. "Not bad," Alia teased, watching him with a grin. "You're finally mastering something that doesn't involve weapons or secrets." Harry smirked. "I'm expanding my skill set." Mrs. Craven sighed with a mischievous gleam. "He only cooks because he's trying to impress you." "I can see that," Alia replied in sign, her hands moving gracefully. "And it's working." Harry caught enough of their exchange to narrow his eyes suspiciously. "I caught the word impress. Should I be worried?" "Not unless you burn the pancakes," Alia said, laughing. After breakfast, the three lingered at the table. The sunlight shifted across their plates, catching the gold band on Harry's wrist, the bracelet Mrs. Cravens had given him after his recovery, engraved with a single word: listen. He still wore it every day. On the counter nearby, a neat stack of papers waited, the final documents for the foundation they'd been building together in Mrs. Cravens' honor. The logo, drawn by one of Alia's students, showed two open hands shaped like wings. Hands That Listen, a foundation dedicated to connecting the hearing and deaf communities through education, support, and compassion. Alia looked at the papers, pride swelling in her chest. "It's real now," she said softly. "We're really doing this." Harry nodded. "You are. I'm just following your lead." Mrs. Cravens reached across the table and patted his arm, smiling. "You both lead," she signed, "just in different ways." Her words brought a silence that wasn't awkward. It was full, like music only the three of them could hear. A few moments later, Mrs. Cravens leaned back, her silver hair catching the light. Her hands began to move again, steady and graceful. "He listens now," she signed, looking at Alia. Harry grinned, turning toward her. "She's right," he said aloud, his tone playful but touched with warmth. "Though I still miss the days when I could pretend I didn't understand her sarcasm." Mrs. Cravens laughed silently, her eyes glistening with affection. "No more pretending," she replied, her fingers moving slowly. "You finally learned how to listen with your heart." He smiled, glancing at Alia. "I had a good teacher." Alia felt the words settle deep inside her. "We both did," she whispered. The air between them softened, filled with sunlight and the quiet rhythm of belonging. When Mrs. Cravens rose to clear the table, Alia reached out. "Leave it. I'll do it later." The older woman waved her hand dismissively and signed, "You two need to talk." I'll be in the garden. Before Harry could protest, she slipped out to the balcony, humming a tune only she could feel. The apartment grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't demand to be broken. Harry leaned back in his chair, watching Alia as she gathered the cups. You ever think about how different this place feels now? She turned, smiling. You mean since you stopped glaring at the walls? He chuckled. That, and the fact that you filled it with plants and color. It used to feel like a safe house. Now it feels like life. She walked over to him, resting her hand lightly on his shoulder. That's what healing does. It lets the light in. For a moment, he didn't speak. His gaze softened, tracing the curve of her smile. Then he lifted his hands. Slow, deliberate movements. Always. The sign was small, but his eyes said the rest. Alia felt her heart swell. She answered with the same sign, her fingers trembling slightly. Always. He took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, the same hand that had once reached for him in the dark. Outside, Mrs. Cravens glanced through the open window. She saw them there, two silhouettes framed by morning light, and her eyes shimmered with quiet joy. She signed to herself, they listened now. Later, as the city roared back to life, the honking horns, the endless chatter, the hum of living, Harry and Alia stood on the balcony beside Mrs. Cravens, watching the world move below. Cars passed. Children shouted. Somewhere, a street musician began to play a slow, wistful melody on the violin. Harry slid his arm around Alia's waist. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. And as the sound of the city swelled around them, the three stood together in easy silence, the kind born not from fear or solitude, but understanding, the kind that spoke louder than words ever could. The city outside still roared with noise, but in their little world, love had learned to speak in silence. The world is loud, but maybe the truest love speaks without sound. What does silence say to you? If this ending stirred something still inside you, like, share, and subscribe, so you can watch more heartfelt stories like this.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.